I stood frozen in the middle of my family's cornfield, watching as the yellow excavator tore into the soil my grandparents had cultivated for decades. The operator never even glanced my way as rich, dark earth that had fed my family for generations, was scooped away to make room for chlorinated water and concrete. Behind him, a woman in pressed khakis and a polo shirt emblazoned with Valley Vista HOA was popping champagne, surrounded by a small crowd of applauding homeowners. "This is private property," I shouted, my voice nearly lost under the mechanical growl. "You cannot build here." The woman turned, her perfectly highlighted hair catching the morning sun. She looked me up and down, taking in my mud-splattered boots and worn flannel shirt. "This is HOA common property now," she said, her smile never reaching her eyes. "If you have concerns, you can file them with the board, though I would not expect much to come of it." She had no idea who I was, no idea at all. That was about to become her biggest mistake. The Morrison family farm has stood on this land for 4 generations. I can still remember the way my grandfather would walk these fields every morning, checking the crops with calloused hands that told stories of decades spent nurturing this soil. When he passed away 5 years ago, he left the farm to me, his only grandchild who showed any interest in continuing his legacy. It was not just land I inherited, but a responsibility to preserve something increasingly rare in our rapidly developing county. My mornings begin before sunrise. There is something sacred about watching dawn break over rows of corn that stretch toward the horizon. The quiet is different here than anywhere else I have known. Not empty, but filled with subtle sounds of life awakening. Birds calling, leaves rustling, the occasional distant lowing of cattle from the neighboring property. This particular morning seemed no different as I sipped coffee on the porch, planning my day of checking irrigation systems and preparing for the upcoming harvest. That tranquility shattered at precisely 7:42 a.m. when the rumble of heavy machinery cut through the morning air. The sound was not coming from the west, where road construction had been ongoing for weeks. It came from the southern edge of my property, where no work was scheduled or authorized. I set down my mug and started walking, faster with each step, toward the noise that had no business existing on my land. By the time I reached the southern field, my confusion had transformed into disbelief. 3 men in construction vests were placing stakes into my soil. Behind them, a supervisor examined blueprints spread across the hood of a white pickup truck. The truck bore a logo I had seen increasingly around the county: Valley Vista Homeowners Association. "Excuse me," I called out, approaching the group. "What exactly is happening here?" The supervisor looked up, squinting against the morning sun. He appeared mildly annoyed at the interruption, but offered a perfunctory smile. "Morning. We are just marking the boundaries for the new community pool and recreation area. Nothing to worry about." "Community pool? This is private property, my property." I gestured to the cornfield behind me. "This has been Morrison farmland for almost a century." The man chuckled, though there was nothing humorous about the situation. "I think there has been some confusion. This parcel is designated as Valley Vista Common Area on all our plans." He turned the blueprint toward me. "See, Phase 3 Recreation Development." I stepped closer, examining the document. Sure enough, a large blue rectangle marked Aquatic Center overlapped what I knew was the southern corner of my farm. The boundary line had been drawn a full acre into my property. "Your plans are incorrect. This land has never been sold or transferred to Valley Vista or anyone else." I pointed to my tractor parked nearby. "That is my equipment on my land. You need to stop work immediately until we sort this out." The supervisor's friendly demeanor cooled noticeably. Look, we have permits and approvals for this project. Construction starts next week. If you have documents proving ownership, you should take them up with the HOA board. I am just following orders." One of the workers called over, asking where to place the corner stake for the planned playground. The supervisor turned away from me, effectively ending our conversation. I stood there, watching as they continued to claim my land with orange flags and wooden markers, each one a declaration of ownership that directly contradicted the deed locked in my home office safe. Walking back to the house, I felt an unsettling mixture of confusion and anger building inside me. Valley Vista was the sprawling suburban development that had been steadily encroaching on local farmland for the past decade. Their perfect lawns and identical two-story homes had been creeping closer to my property line each year, but they had never before had the audacity to claim my land as their own. Inside, I pulled out the property records my grandfather had meticulously maintained. The boundaries were clear and undisputed. Whatever error or intentional land grab was happening, I needed to address it immediately. Tomorrow would bring more workers, more equipment, and potentially irreversible damage to land that had been in my family longer than Valley Vista had existed even as a concept. The Valley Vista Homeowners Association had a reputation throughout the county. Their pristine community of upper-middle-class homes commanded some of the highest property values in the region, largely due to their strict enforcement of community standards. Rumors abounded about homeowners fined for grass half an inch too tall or mailboxes painted unapproved shades of black. I had always considered myself fortunate to exist outside their jurisdiction, separated by the clear legal boundary between their planned community and my agricultural property. I spent that evening researching everything I could find about Valley Vista HOA. Their website displayed professional photographs of manicured common areas and smiling families enjoying community amenities. The board of directors page featured several names and faces, but one stood out prominently at the top: Karen Hampton, president. Her professional headshot showed a woman in her 50s with perfectly styled blonde hair and a confident smile that suggested she was accustomed to getting her way. The next morning, I dressed in my most presentable non-farm clothes, khakis and a button-down shirt, and drove to the Valley Vista clubhouse. The building was imposing in its calculated elegance, all stone facade and large windows overlooking an immaculate golf course. Inside, a receptionist directed me to a conference room where the board apparently held regular office hours for community concerns. Karen Hampton sat behind a large desk, typing on a sleek laptop. She looked up as I entered, her expression shifting from mild irritation to practiced customer service pleasantness. "Good morning, how can I help you?" she asked, not bothering to introduce herself. "I am here about the planned aquatic center construction," I said, placing my property documents on her desk. "There seems to be a serious boundary error. The southern portion where you have marked for construction is actually my farmland." Karen glanced at the papers without touching them. "And you are?" "James Morrison. My family has owned Morrison Farm for generations. Your construction team was placing markers on my property yesterday." "Morrison," she repeated, as if committing the name to memory for future reference. "I understand your concern, but I can assure you that all our development plans have been thoroughly vetted and approved. We do not make boundary errors." "With all due respect, Ms. Hampton, in this case you have. These documents clearly show." "Mr. Morrison," she interrupted, leaning forward slightly, "Valley Vista has invested considerable resources in planning this amenity. Our members have already paid special assessments for this project. Construction begins next week. The time for property disputes has long passed. I pushed the deed closer to her. Please just look at the documentation. The boundary line is clearly established. Karen sighed and briefly glanced at the top page. These appear to be quite old records. Our development plans incorporate the most recent surveys and county approvals. If there is a discrepancy, I suggest you take it up with the county zoning office. She slid the papers back toward me. That is exactly what I intend to do, I replied, gathering my documents. Do what you feel you must, she said with a dismissive wave. But understand that delaying this project will not make you popular with the 300 families who have been promised a pool by summer. Progress moves forward, Mr. Morrison, even when certain parties resist change. 3 days later, a certified letter arrived at my farmhouse. The envelope bore the Valley Vista logo and contained a formal notice claiming easement rights over the disputed area. It referenced eminent domain principles and demanded I remove any farm equipment near their property within 48 hours or face legal consequences. The letter was signed by Karen Hampton, her signature an elaborate flourish that somehow managed to convey arrogance on paper. Through a neighbor whose cousin lived in Valley Vista, I learned the HOA had already collected over $200,000 in special assessments specifically for the aquatic center. Memberships had been pre-sold. Construction contracts signed. Karen's reputation and credibility with residents hinged on delivering this amenity on schedule and under budget. Any delay would be personally and professionally embarrassing for her. What Karen Hampton and the Valley Vista HOA board did not know, what none of the development's residents knew, was that for the past 8 years, I had served as the county zoning director. My position was not something I typically mentioned when introducing myself as a farmer. The Morrison farm predated my career in county government, and I had always been careful to maintain ethical separation between my professional responsibilities and personal property interests. My office occupied the eastern corner of the 3rd floor in the county administrative building. The space featured large windows overlooking the rapidly developing landscape that I was tasked with regulating. The walls displayed detailed maps of the county, color-coded by zoning designation. Agricultural zones like my farm were shaded green. Residential developments like Valley Vista were yellow. The boundary between those colors on the official county map was precisely where my property ended and theirs began, a boundary that their construction stakes had clearly violated. I had built my professional reputation on fairness and strict adherence to protocol. When developers or private citizens came before the zoning board with requests or disputes, I applied regulations consistently regardless of personal feelings. This approach had earned me respect from both development interests and conservation advocates, no small achievement in a county experiencing rapid growth and the tensions that accompanied it. The morning after receiving the certified letter, I arrived at my office earlier than usual. I unlocked the records room where physical copies of all county zoning decisions were archived. Valley Vista's development had begun 12 years ago, and I needed to review the complete history of their expansion. The original approvals for Valley Vista Phases 1 and 2 were straightforward and properly documented. However, as I examined the Phase 3 plans, which included the disputed area where they now claim the right to build their aquatic center, I noticed several irregularities. The boundary descriptions contained vague wording that contradicted earlier, more precise documentation. References to natural boundaries replaced the specific coordinate markers used in previous phases. Most concerning was a notation indicating verbal agreement with adjacent property owners, with no accompanying documentation of said agreement. My grandfather had been alive when Phase 3 was approved. I knew with absolute certainty he would never have verbally agreed to surrender any portion of our farmland. I checked the signature line on the approval documents. The acting zoning director at that time was Matthew Caldwell, my predecessor who had retired under something of a cloud after allegations of preferential treatment for certain developers. I closed the folder and returned to my office, placing a call to Sarah Johnson in the county legal department. Sarah and I had worked together on numerous zoning disputes over the years. She answered on the second ring. "Sarah, I need your input on a situation, but I need you to understand this is a sensitive matter," I began. "You have my attention, James," she replied. "Hypothetically speaking, if a homeowners association proceeded with construction on land where ownership was in dispute, what would be the proper county response?" "Hypothetically," she paused, "a stop work order would be issued immediately pending resolution of the property dispute. If construction continued after notification, fines would accrue daily. Why do you ask?" I explained the situation in carefully neutral terms, framing it initially as a general inquiry rather than a personal matter. Only after outlining the facts did I reveal that the property in question was my own farm. "James, you need to recuse yourself officially from any decision-making role in this matter," Sarah advised immediately. "But that does not mean you cannot protect your property rights. Document everything. Follow every procedure precisely as you would instruct any other property owner to do, and consider filing a formal complaint as a private citizen." "That is exactly my intention," I assured her. I could have mentioned my position to Karen Hampton yesterday, but that would have been inappropriate leveraging of my office for personal benefit. I wanted to give them the opportunity to recognize and correct their error through normal channels. "And they refused?" Sarah asked. "More than refused. They sent me what amounts to a threatening letter claiming rights to my property." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Document the encroachment. File the complaint as a private citizen. Let the system work as it is designed to work. If they broke ground without resolving a legitimate property dispute, they have put themselves in a legally indefensible position." After our conversation, I sat at my desk contemplating my next steps. I could immediately reveal my position and likely watch Karen Hampton backpedal frantically. The temptation was strong, but professional ethics demanded I follow proper procedures, building an irrefutable case the same way I would instruct any other county resident to do. Valley Vista HOA had made their aggressive move assuming I was just a simple farmer they could intimidate. Their miscalculation would be addressed, but through proper channels and with proper documentation. Despite sending a formal response to the HOA's certified letter, including copies of my property deed and historical survey markers, construction equipment arrived at the disputed boundary exactly 1 week later. I watched from my kitchen window as flatbed trucks delivered an excavator, a bulldozer, and pallets of construction materials. Workers began unloading orange safety fencing and marking the exact area that had been staked previously. I immediately documented everything with my camera, carefully timestamping each photograph. This was no longer merely a boundary dispute, but an active incursion onto private property. Even as I photographed the activity, I completed the official county forms for reporting unauthorized construction, the same forms I had provided to countless citizens over the years. The irony was not lost on me that I now found myself on the other side of the process I administered professionally. By mid-morning, local news vans had arrived. Karen Hampton had orchestrated a formal groundbreaking ceremony for what was being called the Valley Vista Aquatic and Recreation Center. The event had been promoted in local media as a milestone for the community. I continued documenting from a distance as Karen arrived wearing a cream-colored pantsuit that stood out starkly against the dark soil of my farmland. A small platform had been erected where Karen and several board members now stood, addressing a gathering of perhaps 40 residents. Though I could not hear her words clearly from my position, her gestures were animated and frequently directed toward the area where construction would soon begin. The crowd applauded at several points. Near the conclusion of her remarks, champagne was distributed in plastic flutes, and Karen led a toast before ceremonially turning the first shovelful of soil with a gold-painted ceremonial spade. The moment her shovel penetrated the ground, my ground, I felt a visceral reaction that surprised me with its intensity. This was not merely soil being displaced. It was a physical manifestation of the disregard these people had for boundaries, both literal and figurative. Generations of my family had tended this land, and now a woman who had likely never grown so much as a tomato plant was claiming it with a champagne toast. As the ceremony concluded and actual construction equipment moved into position, I noticed several residents looking in my direction with expressions ranging from curiosity to discomfort. Not everyone in Valley Vista was oblivious to the situation. One older man even broke away from the group and walked in my direction, stopping at the edge of what they considered their property line. "You must be the farmer," he said simply. "James Morrison," I replied. "This is Morrison farmland they are building on." The man glanced back at the dispersing crowd, then returned his gaze to me. Some of us raised questions about the boundary at the last meeting. Karen assured everyone that all legal issues had been resolved. "They most certainly have not been resolved," I stated firmly. He nodded slowly. "I suspected as much. Not everyone in Valley Vista approves of how the board operates, Mr. Morrison. Some of us moved here from farms ourselves. We understand property rights." With that, he turned and walked back toward the development, occasionally looking over his shoulder at the construction equipment now actively digging into my field. Throughout the afternoon, I continued documenting each phase of the construction process. The excavator operator seemed particularly aggressive, tearing into the earth with unnecessary force, occasionally glancing my way with what appeared to be deliberate provocation. By sunset, a significant portion of the field had been excavated for what would presumably become the pool basin. Crops that had been growing just hours earlier now lay in mounds of displaced soil. As darkness fell, I walked the new boundary created by their excavation. The soil felt different under my boots now, compacted by heavy machinery, mixed with gravel in some areas where they had begun preparing for foundations. I crouched down and took a handful, allowing it to filter through my fingers. Tomorrow would bring consequences for Valley Vista HOA, but tonight I allowed myself to experience the grief of seeing land that had nourished my family for generations treated with such disregard. In the distance, I could see lights still on in the Valley Vista clubhouse. Board members were likely celebrating their successful groundbreaking. Their celebration would be short-lived. The county zoning director would be paying them a visit in the morning, and not as a simple farmer with a complaint, but as a public official with the full authority of county regulations behind him. I arrived at the construction site precisely at 8:00 a.m. the following morning. Unlike my previous visits, I drove the county-issued vehicle bearing the official seal of the zoning department. I had dressed in my professional attire, dark suit, tie, polished shoes, a stark contrast to the farm clothes in which the HOA representatives had previously seen me. In my briefcase were the official stop work orders, violation notices, and supporting documentation. The construction crew had already begun work for the day. The excavator was extending the hole that would eventually become the swimming pool, while other workers were setting forms for concrete pouring scheduled later that week. The site foreman noticed my vehicle first, clearly recognizing the county markings. He approached with a wary expression as I stepped out of the car. "County Zoning Department," he said, not as a question but as a resignation. "Should have known this was coming." "I need all work to cease immediately," I stated, my tone professional and measured. "This is an official stop work order for construction occurring on disputed property without proper verification of boundaries." The foreman sighed heavily. "Let me call the HOA president. She handles all the permits and approvals." While he made the call, I proceeded to place official notice placards at the entrance to the construction site. The workers gradually powered down their equipment, gathering in small groups and speaking in hushed tones. Many had likely experienced stop work orders before and understood the serious implications. Approximately 15 minutes later, a luxury SUV pulled into the site at a speed that sent gravel flying. Karen Hampton emerged, her normally perfect appearance slightly disheveled, suggesting she had rushed to address this unexpected obstacle. She spotted me immediately but did not appear to recognize me in my professional capacity. "I am Karen Hampton, president of Valley Vista HOA," she announced as she approached. "Who authorized this stop work order? We have all necessary permits and approvals." I turned to face her directly. "Good morning, Ms. Hampton. We met previously when I attempted to resolve this boundary dispute informally." Her expression shifted from irritation to confusion as she tried to place my face. "You are the farmer," she said finally, her tone dismissive. "What is this about? Why are you in that vehicle?" "James Morrison," I replied, extending my identification badge. "County Zoning Director. This stop work order is authorized by my office due to construction activities occurring on disputed property boundaries without proper verification and resolution." Karen stared at my identification, color draining from her face. "This is impossible. This is a conflict of interest. You cannot possibly be both the complaining party and the zoning director." "I assure you, it is not only possible but factual. And regarding conflict of interest, I have already filed appropriate disclosures with the County Ethics Committee and Legal Department. My personal interest in this matter does not negate your organization's clear violations of zoning regulations and property rights." By this time, several board members had arrived, along with curious residents. They formed a semicircle around us, creating an inadvertent audience for what was becoming a very public confrontation. I maintained my professional demeanor despite Karen's increasingly agitated state. "This stop work order cites multiple violations," I continued, handing her the official documentation. "Construction on disputed property boundaries, failure to provide accurate surveys prior to breaking ground, environmental impact concerns regarding agricultural runoff. The potential fines currently stand at $2,000 per day of violation, retroactive to yesterday's groundbreaking ceremony. We have approvals, signed documents." Karen's voice had risen considerably. "This project has been planned for years. Commissioner Wilson himself assured me there would be no obstacles." "Commissioner Wilson is not the zoning authority for this county, Ms. Hampton. That would be my office. And while you may have approvals, they appear to be based on boundary descriptions that directly contradict historical property records. The burden of proof regarding property lines rests with Valley Vista as the developing entity." One of the board members, a serious-looking man in his 60s, stepped forward. "Karen, perhaps we should adjourn to discuss this privately with our attorney." Karen ignored him, her focus entirely on me. "Do you have any idea who you are dealing with? I have connections throughout this county. One phone call and your position could be in jeopardy." The gathered crowd murmured uncomfortably at this threat. I remained calm, even offering a slight smile. "Ms. Hampton, are you threatening a county official in the performance of his duties? I would advise against adding intimidation to the list of violations already documented." The board member physically intervened at this point, taking Karen's arm and speaking quietly but firmly. "We are adjourning now, Karen. No further statements." He turned to me with a professional nod. "We will comply with the stop work order pending resolution of this matter. Our attorney will be in contact with the county legal department this afternoon." As they led Karen away, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment, I continued placing the required notices around the perimeter of the construction site. The workers had already begun securing equipment for removal, understanding that this project would not be continuing today. Several residents remained, watching the proceedings with expressions ranging from concern to what appeared to be reluctant admiration. For those with questions about this action, I addressed the remaining crowd. Detailed information will be available at the county zoning office. As this matter involves ongoing legal considerations, I cannot provide additional comments at this time. The Valley Vista Community Center was filled beyond capacity for the emergency HOA meeting called 3 days after the stop work order. Rows of folding chairs had been hastily added to accommodate the unprecedented attendance. I sat quietly near the back, now dressed in casual business attire that bridged my dual identities as both property owner and county official. The room hummed with tense conversations, residents speculating about the financial implications of the halted construction. At precisely 7:00 p.m., the board members filed in and took their seats at the long table facing the audience. Karen was noticeably absent. The vice president, who introduced himself as Robert Gallagher, called the meeting to order with a somber expression. "Thank you all for attending this emergency session on such short notice. As you are aware, construction on the aquatic center has been temporarily suspended pending resolution of certain regulatory matters. Our attorney has advised that we address these issues transparently with the membership." A woman in the front row immediately raised her hand. "Where is Karen? She should be explaining this situation herself." Robert exchanged glances with other board members before responding. "President Hampton has recused herself from this particular meeting due to potential conflicts of interest in the matter at hand. She remains active on the board for all other business." This announcement triggered a wave of murmurs throughout the room. The HOA treasurer, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, cleared his throat and stood with a stack of papers in hand. "I have been asked to provide a financial assessment of our current situation," he began, his voice betraying nervousness. "The stop work order issued by the county zoning department has several immediate financial implications for our community." He adjusted his glasses and began reading from his prepared statement. "First, daily fines of $2,000 have begun accruing as of the date of the groundbreaking ceremony. Second, our construction contractor has informed us that equipment rental and crew scheduling penalties will apply during the work stoppage. Third, if the boundary dispute is resolved not in our favor, we will incur additional costs for restoration of the disputed land to its original condition." A collective gasp rippled through the audience as the treasurer continued. "Conservative estimates place potential expenses at approximately $325,000 if resolved within 30 days. This does not include potential legal expenses or refunds that may be due to residents who prepaid for pool memberships." "How could this happen?" someone shouted from the middle of the room. "We were told all approvals were in place." Robert raised his hands in a placating gesture. "Please, we understand your concerns. Our attorney will now explain the situation regarding the property boundaries." A professionally dressed woman stepped forward, introducing herself as the HOA's legal counsel. Valley Vista HOA is currently facing a significant boundary dispute with the adjacent Morrison Farm property. County records show discrepancies between our development plans and historical property markers. "In plain English," interrupted an elderly resident, "did we try to build on someone else's land?" The attorney hesitated. There appears to be legitimate questions about the precise boundary location based on documentation provided by both parties. This diplomatic answer satisfied no one. The room erupted in angry crosstalk. Robert repeatedly struck his gavel until order was restored. During this commotion, I had remained silent, observing the community coming to terms with their leadership's mistakes. When the room finally quieted, I raised my hand. Robert recognized me with visible reluctance. "James Morrison," I introduced myself, standing to address the room. "I own Morrison Farm, the property adjacent to the planned aquatic center location." All heads turned in my direction, many residents seeing me for the first time. I continued calmly. "I am also the county zoning director, which some of you may already know from local news reports." This disclosure caused another wave of murmurs through the crowd. I waited for them to subside before continuing. "I want to clarify certain facts. First, I attempted to resolve this boundary issue informally with your board president before any construction began. Those attempts were rebuffed. Second, my professional role did not influence the stop work order, which was issued following standard county procedures for disputed boundaries. Third, comprehensive documentation dating back to 1932 clearly establishes the property line approximately 50 yards north of where construction began. I removed several large aerial photographs from my folder and held them up. These county survey maps from 3 different decades all show consistent boundaries that have never changed. The discrepancy appears only in Valley Vista Phase 3 planning documents, which contain vague boundary descriptions contradicting all historical records. The HOA attorney intervened. "Mr. Morrison, while we appreciate your position, this forum may not be appropriate for presentation of evidence that should be reviewed through proper legal channels." "I agree completely," I replied. "I merely wanted to provide context for community members who may not understand how this situation developed. My goal has always been proper resolution, not punishment." A middle-aged woman stood from her seat near the front. "So we are paying thousands in daily fines because our board refused to check property lines properly. And now we might lose the pool we already paid for." The treasurer nodded reluctantly. "Special assessments have already been collected from all members specifically for this project. If the current location proves unusable, alternative sites within confirmed HOA property would need to be evaluated, likely requiring additional funding." This admission sparked the largest outburst yet. Several residents began demanding Karen's immediate resignation. Others called for the entire board to step down. Through it all, I remained standing, watching as the community that had so confidently championed their expansion onto my land now faced the consequences of their leadership's arrogance and carelessness. Spring arrived with the particular vibrancy that only agricultural communities truly appreciate. The disputed corner of my farm had been fully restored at Valley Vista HOA's expense. Fresh topsoil replaced what had been excavated, and newly planted corn seedlings now stretched toward the sun, where construction equipment had stood only months earlier. The restoration was part of a comprehensive settlement agreement that had resolved the boundary dispute definitively. Margaret Chen, the newly elected Valley Vista HOA president, walked beside me along the freshly installed boundary markers. Unlike her predecessor, Margaret approached leadership with thoughtful consideration rather than aggressive expansion. "The surveyor confirmed all markers are GPS registered now," she said, gesturing toward the concrete posts that clearly delineated where Valley Vista ended and Morrison Farm began. "There should never be any confusion about boundaries again." "That provides peace of mind for everyone," I agreed. The settlement had been extensive and, for Valley Vista, expensive. Beyond the physical restoration of my farmland, they had covered all legal expenses and paid damages for crop loss. Most significantly, they had established a conservation easement along our shared boundary that permanently protected a 30-foot buffer zone from any future development. The easement required native wildflowers be planted to support local pollinators, an environmental benefit that served both their community and my agricultural interests. "The residents have been surprisingly supportive of the conservation easement," Margaret commented, as we observed workers planting purple coneflower and black-eyed Susan seedlings along the buffer zone. "Many say they prefer the natural border to the original pool plans. It provides a sense of openness without sacrificing privacy." What Margaret tactfully avoided mentioning was the fate of her predecessor. Karen Hampton had resigned from the board immediately following an internal vote of no confidence. Her house in Valley Vista had sold quickly and significantly below market value. Through community connections, I had heard she relocated to a neighboring county where her reputation had not preceded her. The entire board had eventually been replaced through special elections, with the new leadership explicitly campaigning on promises of transparency and respect for surrounding communities. "Have you found an alternative location for your aquatic center?" I asked as we completed our inspection of the boundary markers. Margaret nodded. "Yes, actually. We are repurposing part of the tennis complex that was underutilized. It required redesigning the pool to a more compact footprint, but construction begins next month with all proper permits and surveys verified in advance." She smiled wryly at this last comment. As we parted ways at the edge of my property, Margaret paused. "You know, despite the unfortunate circumstances, many residents believe this controversy ultimately improved our community. The previous board operated with minimal oversight or accountability. This experience has engaged homeowners who previously paid little attention to governance issues." I considered this perspective as I watched her walk back toward the neat rows of Valley Vista homes. Perhaps some good had indeed come from the conflict, though I would have preferred to achieve community improvement through less disruptive means. Returning to my daily farm work, I reflected on the lessons of the past months. I had maintained my professional ethics throughout the dispute, never leveraging my position inappropriately despite the temptation to do so. The system I had helped administer for years had worked precisely as designed, protecting property rights and ensuring regulatory compliance regardless of who stood on either side of a boundary line. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across newly planted fields as I checked irrigation systems. In the distance, I could see the native wildflower buffer beginning to take form along the boundary. This living barrier between Valley Vista and Morrison Farm seemed an appropriate metaphor for the resolution we had achieved, a clear separation that nonetheless contributed to the health of both properties. My grandfather would have appreciated this outcome. He had taught me that boundaries existed not merely to divide, but to define, to establish clearly what belongs where so that mutual respect could flourish. Valley Vista had learned this lesson the hard way, but the education appeared to be taking root as surely as the spring crops emerging from soil that had nearly been lost to concrete and chlorinated water. As dusk settled over the farm, I found satisfaction not in revenge or triumph, but in restoration, of land, of boundaries, and of proper order. Sometimes justice comes not through confrontation, but through simply standing firmly in the right place at the right time, with truth and law on your side.